りに行こう。
勝利の光。
Hello, it's Alpha here, and today we're gonna be talking about the latest Graveborn hero, Callan. Now this is going to be a first impression video of his PvP performance, so this is based on very limited testing, and I wasn't actually able to do the testing with the heroes that I wanted, so hopefully in the near future I can make an update video with some of the other options that I'm gonna talk about today, and then we can like form a better opinion on his performance. But yeah, let's quickly go through his skills, and I will give you some of my notes about his skills, and then I will give some ideas as to what I think his potential role could be in a PvP team. Okay, so let's start with his ultimate ability. So he can use this ability right when the battle starts, and the same effect happens whenever he then uses the ultimate later on. Basically, he becomes unaffected and creates a shield around him, and then that shield will also absorb 50% of the damage from the allies who are within 2 tiles of the shield. So the idea here is that he can absorb 50% of the damage from the allies that are around him, But the potential issues kind of with this skill is that the 50% is not necessarily enough absorbed to keep the allies alive. So for example, if there is like high burst at the start of the battle, or there is like high single target damage, then the allies are still going to be taking damage, and the 50% might not be enough. And another potential issue is that it's only 2 tiles around Callan. So then if there are allies who are outside that 2 tile range, then this does nothing to help them to stay alive. And what happens at the start of the battle is that for the first 5 to 10 seconds in the fight, your Callan will be staying in place because he's unaffected and he's kind of channeling this shield while this skill is happening. So then if you have melee heroes, they will start running past the Callan, and then based on the positioning of your heroes and the enemy heroes, it might mean that your melee heroes, for example, will run out of the protection area, and then they are just frontlining while your Callan is staying back, kind of channeling this skill. So this has some potential issues with melee heroes especially. This is kind of the skill that you need to make work if you want to use him. So I think one of the ways to kind of make sure that this skill is working is to have kind of very stationary team, so that your team is not going to be moving that much away from the Callan. So that means having ranged heroes with long range, and then potentially other support heroes that usually won't move from the ultimate range. But then we can move into the next skill, which is called Flail Slam. So the kind of the important note about this skill is that it will knock down enemies in rectangular area in front of Callan. It will also do damage, but the damage part is, in my opinion, quite irrelevant because his damage output is very low. So okay, yes, it will do some damage, but that's not the important part about the skill. Now, the other thing about this skill is that it has quite long cooldown, so he won't be doing this very often. And also the skill description is a little bit unclear. The skill description basically only says that he will knock down enemies in a rectangular area, which doesn't even tell you how long that area is, and it doesn't tell you. It doesn't show you diagram of the area if you hover over the skill. So I'm not sure how big the area actually is, but it seems to be something 3 tiles forward. So I guess is it 3 tiles forward and 3 tiles wide, or what? I don't know, maybe. But whatever the area is, since he's kind of a frontline hero, that usually means that it won't hit kind of the enemy backline heroes usually, because they have their own tank, and then Callan is stationary for the first 5 seconds. So that means that most likely the enemy tank will kind of come to your team instead, and then the enemy backline is usually protected from this skill ever hitting them. Now obviously if all of the enemies are really backed up and not moving as well, and then your Callan goes next to them, then this skill can be quite effective if it knocks down the whole enemy team, but usually it's probably going to miss most of the important heroes, so this skill kind of feels pretty low impact. Then we have the second ability, which is called Eternal Watch, and it says that Callan converts damage absorbed by his shield and then unleashes the stored damage in 2 tile radius. So the way that I understand this skill is kind of it's trying to be somewhat similar to what Thoran does, for example. So if you don't know what Thoran does is, when he casts his ultimate, if he gets damage during that ultimate, he will then return that damage back to the enemies. But the issue with this skill is that this has quite a few limitations. So if you read into the description of this skill, the maximum amount of damage that this skill can return to enemies is 600% of Callan's damage. So the damage that he can return with this skill is based on his own damage, whereas, for example, with Thoran, it's just simply Toran will return 240% of the damage that he takes. The Toran's return damage is insanely powerful, like it can one-shot enemies, but it's based on like the raw damage that he takes, whereas this skill has like cap based on Callan's own damage. And the second limitation with this skill is that he can only do damage if he absorbs the damage with his ultimate ability. So whenever he has his shield up, the shield absorbs damage. And it's only 35% of the absorbed damage. So basically what I'm trying to say is that usually when this skill happens, it feels that it does basically nothing. Because this damage amount that this skill is able to return to the enemy is, at least from what I've seen, is like close to nothing. So then we have the Mythic Plus ability, which is called Hallowed Wrath. And this ability happens once during the battle, so only once. And whenever Callan or any of the allies drop below 30% health for the first time in the battle, and then Callan will deal damage to all enemies, and he will stun all enemies for 2 seconds. So my notes about this skill is that it is a nice skill, obviously. If you think about it, 2 seconds stun to all enemies, no matter where they are in the battlefield. But the issue is that, once again, the damage part is kind of irrelevant. So basically, I would just read this skill as he will stun all enemies for 2 seconds. But the other issue is that it happens only once during the fight. And the kind of like the biggest issue with this skill is that it happens so late. So kind of like the idea, I guess, for this skill is that once one of your allies fall low on health, Callan will kind of like stop the fight by stunning everyone, and then hopefully your team is kind of able to heal back that ally who fell low on health. But this often doesn't happen because of the way that this skill works is that it happens so late, so the ally has to be like below 30% health, so they're almost like dead already. And if Callan is doing some other skill while the ally falls below 30% health, then he will like finish off doing that skill, and then after that he will start casting this stun. But that is already usually too late. The ally has already died at that point, and the stun will only happen like after the ally has died. So yeah, it feels a bit clunky. Like if it was like instant when the ally falls to 30%, then this skill would be a lot more useful. But I mean, it can still be nice sometimes. And it has like I think it has decent synergy with heroes like Callan, where Callan it doesn't matter that much if Callan dies. So like if you frontline Callan and Callan falls to 30% health, and then maybe she even dies, and then the stun happens, but then usually your Callan will revive quite quickly after that. So it has some okay synergy with Callan, but yeah, his skill just feels a bit clunky. And then we have his Supreme Plus ability, which is just simply whenever Callan gains a shield, he will recover HP equal to 15% of the shield's max value. Now, the thing about this is that the only ability that Callan has that generates a shield is his ultimate. So if he doesn't do like ultimate during the fight, then this Supreme Plus ability by itself does nothing. So I think from what I'm kind of reading this is that if you have other heroes who give shield to Callan, then he should also then heal 50% of the shield value. So that might be like actually a useful way of using him, is bringing some other heroes that give shield to allies, and then he can heal on top of gaining that shield. So that would be heroes like, twins have some shielding ability, but it's a bit like random who they shield. Hugin is probably the best option when it comes to giving shield. And obviously there are some other heroes that can give shield, like Coco's ultimate can give shield. There's like some light bearer heroes like Corin and Lucius that can give shield, etc. So maybe the kind of like the key to using him effectively is then having some of those heroes in the team providing him shields, and then the shields also healing him. So then we can talk about what kind of teams I think he might fit in. So these are kind of like the theory crafted teams in a sense that I haven't been able to test them that much because I'm missing some of the key heroes for testing this. So hopefully in the couple of days I will be able to test these teams a bit more, but I will still give you the idea that I had with him. So this is the core team. So you would have Callan, Ludovic and twins. So the idea is that Callan and Ludovic are there to kind of like keep the twins alive by, you know, Callan having the instant shielding at the start of the battle, and then Ludovic having the instant healing at the start of the battle. And this team comp also has a nice faction synergy, so just with these heroes you are already having the first level of the faction stats unlocked. So then one potential question with this setup is that do we link Callan with the twins? That would give Callan more vitality. The link from the twins gives vitality, so that means that the shields that Callan have will be bigger. And then that also means that the healings that he will receive from the Supreme Plus ability and in general will be more effective on him. And then the link will also provide him more defensive stats, so he is able to be a bit more tankier. And then the link also provides some energy so that he can ultimate more often, giving the damage reduction from his shield ability more often to the team. So I think it could be a good idea to link him. Okay, so then who would be the fourth hero in this team? Well, if we want to use twins, the idea with twins is that you want them to ultimate fast, and then you want them to like keep kind of spamming their ultimate. So you would need someone in the team to ultimate before the twins, so that if the enemy team is running Lily May, which they quite often are, then Lily May doesn't interrupt your twins' first ultimate. The options are something like it could be Aaron, it could be Brian, it could be Niru, it could be Hugin, and I guess it could be technically someone like Shakir or Odie, because they will usually ultimate faster than the twins will. But if you go to like Shakir and Odie, I don't think they have much synergy with the other team, so that's why I wouldn't really go with them. And to some extent, Aaron and Brian don't really have kind of synergy with this team idea that much either, aside from just like blocking the Lily May's ultimate. Niru is a support hero that can technically like provide some extra support for the team, and also he is a Graveborn hero, so that has some factional synergy with the team, but other than that he is kind of like meh hero in general, like he doesn't really do much, so that's why he's not maybe the best option either. So I think like in terms of like these options, I think Hugin is the best option because he also provides some energy for the twins if you place the twins behind him, and he provides shields, a lot of shields, and like we talked earlier, the shields have some synergy with Callan's Supreme Plus ability, so whenever Hugin would shield Callan, then I assume that Callan would get also healing from that shield because of his Supreme Plus ability. And then the last hero in this team would have to be some kind of hyper carry type of hero, because basically what the other heroes in this teams are Ludovic and twins, and then let's say that we're using Hugin. Those all are support heroes, they're not going to be doing that much damage. And then Callan is going to be like a tank hero that also doesn't do that much damage. So your last hero would basically have to be someone who is able to kill all of the enemies almost alone, basically. So then these are some of the potential heroes. Now I think when you look at these heroes, I did my initial testings with Callan because I had Callan as one of the heroes on that account. And Callan is kind of like a hyper carry. She can do like a lot of AoE damage to all of the enemies, but at the same time that damage is not necessarily enough. So especially if they have like Paragon advantage on you and they have like 2 supports or someone like Haven with AoE healing, like powerful AoE healing. Sometimes that can mean that your Callan, even if she's like free to channel her ultimate, is not able to kill the enemies with that ultimate damage alone. So that's why Callan is not necessarily going to work in this role that well. Bonnie is maybe potential. Bonnie has like a lot of damage potential, so maybe she's good enough for this, but I guess one of the issues with running Bonnie in this team is that she kind of needs 2 magic sources to spread the debuff effectively, and this team doesn't have that many like magic sources if you are running Callan and then if you're running Hugin in the team. So Harak is probably like the best in terms of like being a hyper carry. So yeah, that could be the team that you would then run Harak in this team. Although I'm not sure if the team is like enough to keep Harak alive. Maybe it is. That needs more testing. And then I guess Diurnal could also work. With Diurnal you need 3 buffs from the team, so you could get those 3 buffs by having Enlightening Spell target Diurnal, and then Twins will give 1 buff and Hugin can give the second buff. Or you could, if you don't want to use Enlightening Spell on your Diurnal, you could maybe switch out Ludovic for someone like Damien or Rowan instead, and then you would also have the 3 buffs. But then if you are dropping Ludovic, he is kind of like the main healer in this team, so I don't know if you then have enough sustain. The other team idea is of course just running your typical Bonnie team, so you would then have someone like Callan, Bonnie, Ludovic and Callan, and then the last hero could be either Damien, Tassi, Igor or Fresto. The role of Callan would be just in this team to kind of provide anti-burst for Bonnie, because the kind of like the best way to deal with Bonnie if you're attacking a Bonnie defense team is to burst the Bonnie. So this is kind of like the summary of my initial testing with Callan, is that I think he's like the kind of like the only use is to be this anti-burst type hero in your arena defense teams, so that you can like protect your key damage dealers like Bonnie, for example, or like the hyper carries like Harak or Diurnal. But the issue is that I'm not 100% sure that he can even defend them enough, even with the 50% damage reduction that he gets, because 50% damage might still be enough to like kill someone like Bonnie. We'll have to do more testing to see if that's actually enough to keep the Bonnie alive. Some potential issues with Callan is that if you're running melee heroes in your team, they will usually run in front of Callan, because Callan is stationary at the start of the battle for the first 5 to 10 seconds. Most of his skills, other than like the shield that he gives at the start of the battle, seem very low impact, so he's kind of like a one-trick Bonnie, and after that he's kind of meh. He also seems to be a bit squishy after the initial shield is gone, so he has like typical tank stats, but he doesn't really have any damage reduction in his kit, so quite a few good tanks like Fresto, for example. Fresto has damage reduction in his kit, and then he's also like a Graveborn hero, so then if there's like a single target hero like Lily May, who is Wilder hero, so Lily May has a factional advantage on Callan, so she can burst him down quite quickly once the shield is gone. Also, if you are running Callan and the enemy has someone like Toran, for example, then Callan doesn't really have tools to deal with Toran's ultimate, so sometimes the Toran's ultimate will just wipe Callan And then Fresto is also pretty good against Callan because Fresto has a vitality reduction effect. So that means that the Callan's shielding and healing, etc. will be less effective. And then heroes like Odie might also, I mean, Odie is not really used that much on, at least on normal arena. He's used more on Supreme arena, but Callan doesn't really have any tools to deal with Odie's execute. So like I would imagine that sometimes what can happen is that Odie targets Callan, and once the shield is gone, Callan gets like executed by the Odie's poison quite quickly. I would say that it is possible that some very specific PvP teams will find use for him, like I showed in the earlier. Some of those teams might be good with him, but that's probably not enough reason for most players to get him. And just to be clear, when I was testing him, I definitely lost more times than I won, even though I showed you some of the clips where I was winning at the start of the video. But yeah, that is kind of like the first impression. Hopefully I'll be able to do more testing during the next couple of days, and then I can maybe give like an updated view on him.